Hey! Hey, I'm Bennie. By the way, I'm Bennie Crawford. We're going to be talking about a book today that's very good. I think it's very good. So I want to dive right in. The book is called Taking Your Church to the Next Level. I really like this book. It discusses a lot of things. It's written by Gary McIntosh. Gary McIntosh, he's a church growth expert, and he actually talks about a lot of the levels that a church may go through. He talks about what gets you here is not what's going to get you there. Now, that's a great concept when you're thinking about taking your church to the next level. The reason why it's a great concept is because you have to think about objectives. Now, in an organization that I teach with, I develop leaders. Not leaders. I develop instructors or facilitators. And we talk about, in writing objectives, how they should be. They should be specific. They should... It should be written to the audience. It should be telling the audience what they need to know, do, or think. And this is how churches should be doing the same thing. They should be creating some type of vision or some type of statement that gets them from here to there. I think, and so when it comes to what Gary wrote here, he's talking about understandings, really understanding stages of the church. If you understand those stages, then you'll be able to write the objectives you need to accomplish while you're in those stages. So let's dive in and talk about what he says. He starts off by talking, he comes up with he quotes Albert Einstein when he says, the significant problems we face today cannot be challenged with the thought of yesterday. We have to, just because it got us there, doesn't mean that, just because we started there doesn't mean that it's going to help us get to where we need to be. And that's what he talks about there. In this whole book, it is actually split into 3 parts. So we're going to go through them very fast. And I suggest that you read this book. If you're going to start some type of ministry or some type of organization, this is good for either church or other organizations. So if you're going to start an organization, you should think about that. Now, the 3 stages that he talks about here is, he says that first off, you have a predictable growth or decline phase. You have a predictable growth. Now, he says from September to Easter is a time that your church usually grows. But then he says from Easter to around August is when you kind of see a decline in membership there. So there are strategies for moving through those phases of growth. Then he said the next thing is you have to consider is the size of your church. That's part 2. The size of your church is what you need to be thinking about. And then, lastly, he says the age of your church. Does this almost sound like some type of human growth type thing with the stages we go through? Well, we're going to talk about that stage, and Gary actually does it. So, let's go into part 1. Part 1 talks about congregational life cycles. Congregational life cycles. Now, there's about maybe 6, 7 chapters here that he discussed in this part, and he starts off by the first chapter. I think it's called St. John's. I can't remember exactly what it says. I should look it up. That'd be good if I look it up. It's called St. John Syndrome. That's what he says. This part here actually talks all about visions. Basically vision, and it's kind of to get our thoughts together so we can start thinking about things. So it said, now this goes great with visions. You know what we say about visions. If you don't have anywhere you're going, then you're going to lead people to a spot that you're going to lead people to an area that they don't need to be in. So of course we want to make sure we know where we're going. So in chapter 3, chapter 3, to start this life cycle or stages of cycles that we go through when it comes to growth, congregational life cycles, he says the emerging church. Now, this is the fun one. Everybody is on board here. Everybody's on board. People are deciding, hey, this is what I want to do. This is what I can help with. This is how I can build some type of ministry within, or some type of groups. This is what we could do. This is the mission. Everybody knows what the mission is. They usually have come from somewhere else, and they have ideas, and they bring them in. So this is an exciting stage here. But in number 2, in the growing church, in chapter 4, he talked about the growing church. Everybody has a strong sense of mission, vision. They take ownership, and this usually happens within the first 5 years of your church. You're creating new systems, so people are still excited there. And then in chapter 5, he's talking about this consolidating church. Now, this in the consolidating church, this is where you have to realize people start to get spiritual and evangelism mixed up. People kind of start to focus on spiritual things at the church instead of taking part in the part of the Great Commission, as it's called, of the evangelism part. So people start to kind of get a little complacent. They start to relax, and let's use this word. They start to go on autopilot. That's what he talks about in the consolidating church. They go on autopilot. Nobody wants really to jump into different challenges. They want to consistently kind of focus on what they have going. And then you have the declining church. This is chapter 6, the declining church. This is where new members find it difficult to fit in. So if you have, and you know what happens if a new member finds it difficult to fit into your organization, what happens is they have a tendency to come a few times, maybe three times, 4 times. We kind of talk about this in Fusion a little bit. There's another book, another YouTube video that I have talking about the book Fusion. Well, this is where this considers the mission. And you can see this in a declining church. If you have members that's coming a couple of times and you don't have strategies for capturing members or assimilating, that's the word we use then you have a tendency to see members come, they stay for maybe 2, 3, but then they end up leaving because they really don't feel like they fit in. So this is a great chapter you need to dive into, and that's the declining church. The dying church. Whoa, the dying church. This is when 10% of the people is doing 90% of the work. You have to watch that. That's where people are starting to get real complacent. Not a lot of people doing any of the work around. And those are I call it the 5 stages. He said the 5 stages of congregational life cycle. And this is almost just like real life. This is a bell curve where people first off they're born, and that's exciting. You know, I told you first 5 years, and then they go through and they start going through emerging, consolidating, going down, and start to declining just a little bit, and then dying. Well, there's strategies you can do to rebirth or move through, and I think Gary talks about that a lot in his book, which makes sense to me. Now, so through these stages, in order to get through these stages, you need 2 things, and he has chapters on it. Chapter 8 talks about leading through stages. How you lead through each one of those stages. Very important. You really need to think about that. How do you lead through those stages? And then growing through those stages as well. How do you grow through those stages? And I think growing has a lot to do with communication, setting up communication. And then, once again, the book Fusion talks about that just a little bit. How do you help your church to grow? All right. Part 2, church size and stages. Church size and stages. What can we do there? So it starts off, chapter 10, step up to the next level. How do we step to the next level? Well, I'm going to tell you. I'm going to whisper it out. You have to treat your church like a business. I know. I just said a bad word. Church and business can't do the same. Yes, you have to treat the church like a business. He talks about that there because you're going to have the same barriers that you would have in an organization, you're going to have there in your church as well. Some of those barriers when it comes to growing. You're going to reach plateaus. As a matter of fact, when we think of plateaus, we think of steps. He discussed steps in this chapter, and I think this is a great chapter because it talks about steps. Now, let's imagine a step. This is a step. and this is the step. Well, in this, you notice here, if you're stepping here, now, if we got rungs there, you're stepping here. You have a ceiling, and you have something you're standing on, or the floor. Well, this here, the floor is great, but that here is the top of the ceiling of that, and you can't get past that unless you know what the barriers are, and you can move past it. Then you come to the second rung. It's the same thing, and then you step up again. So he actually discussed that, and this is really the barriers and the plateaus you come to. The relational church, churches start off with this, and it's a relational. You have 15 to 200 members there at your church, and this is where the organization this is where you want your pastor to kind of be not having to do other things, because you need the pastor to come and kind of work the system and come up with new ideas and not have to focus on working somewhere else. And you want your pastor to not have to have his thoughts going to another organization. So you want him to basically be full-time here at a church here. And this is when you have about 15 to 200 members. If you want to go to the next level, your pastor has to start thinking about, how can I just do this full time? And that's basically what he's talking about with the relational church. People are building relationships. The managerial church is from 200 to 400 members. This is the middle ground of being a large church and then being a small church. Both of them are together. Now, what happens is it's like the middle child. They're caught in the middle, and they don't know which. You have some people that like small church because they have relationships there. Then you have some people who are more with the vision of, hey, we need to grow, and so they're pulling on this side. So you have two different entities pulling against each other and growing and thinking about how the church should move forward. So this is where you probably need to start considering a dedicated staff, where you have staff that actually works there as well, and this is what they do. They work for the church. They manage the systems that you have in the church, the small groups, let's use, or the ministries that you have. This is what they're doing. So that's staff taking care of that. The organizational church, now this is one of your large churches. This is 400 to 800 members. Yeah, we got a lot of members there, man. This is where you should consider reorganizing how you do things at your church. Rather than the pastor being a managerial type, he should start thinking about leadership here. Leadership, how to lead, how to grow his leaders. Who should he be putting in certain areas? He should be thinking about, are they experienced or not in doing what they're supposed to be doing? Yes. Are they experienced? So now we're moving away from volunteers to people who really know what's going on. And this is in your larger church, and this is the thing that you should think about. Like in your youth ministry, you should think about getting somebody who really works with youth and know how to build programs. You're building stuff here. Your centralized church, centralized church deals, it's more of like board protected, where the pastor is still directing it. However, the board is protecting it. The board is the one coming up saying yes to different ideas, saying, okay, yes, this is the area we should move in. Yes, this is what our church is really about. So that's things that think about in the centralized church. And then the decentralized church, this is what, 1,500 members plus. 1,500 members plus. Now it's time to start building parameters and building out of bounds and inbounds, saying that, hey, this is the ministry for the church. I'm going to start letting the leadership that I have in the lower levels make decisions, because I can't possibly be able to go and take care of people in all the areas. So it's time to start letting other leaders make decisions without having to come to you or to the main pastor that's there. Now he's just directing them. However, they are able to make decisions moving forward. And once again, remember, the staff is experienced. They're experienced in what they do, so they don't need to go to the pastor. Moses did this as well. if you know the story of Moses, when he was talking about, hey, I can't do all this. He had too many people coming to him. Well, he was told to do some certain things. Well, this is where that happens is in the decentralized church. It's too large for him to try to manage the whole thing. And so now let's move on to part 3. This is some choice points. And we only have 2 areas here that this talks about. Now, this is where you're making decisions. You're saying, hey, this is where my church is going or my organization is going, and some things I have to consider here. And the first one is growth and decline. You have to realize that either my organization is declining or it's growing. And then you have to meet it where it's at. That's what you do here. Size does matter on how you run the organization. A small organization is not ran the same as a large organization. So you have to find those strategies and then run it in that manner. You have to do that. Now, see, I'm getting loud. That means I'm getting excited. I didn't mean to. Sorry. All right. I shouldn't have did that, didn't I? This is a recording. I shouldn't have did all those sounds. I like it when I'm talking bass. All right. So this is, you start creating specialized groups here to help you in the growth or the decline. You start to create groups that can kind of see things, have a little vision, and say, hey, we can do this in order to move forward. And that's what happens here. And I think Gary does a good job of describing some of those things that these specialized groups should be taking care of. And then reaching your growth point. Now, this is where the true vision comes. All churches or organizations are not meant to have 1 million people in it. Choose the number and then kind of get to that number, and then they call that, Gary calls that your choice point, or he called it reaching your growth point. Your growth point. If your growth point is 1,500 members, then you strive for that, and you create a 1,500 member. Now it may go over that, but then it may be time to split or grow another organization in another location. See, there are strategies for that, and you have to think about that. And I think a lot of our leaders don't think about those things. So every ministry must realize that, and that they have a growth point. And this is when equilibrium is found. Equilibrium is found here, and now you have both spiritual growth and you have spiritual birth here. And the spiritual birth is for evangelism, and then spiritual growth is for development. Now, we mentioned that earlier, and that's what's happening at that stage. We have to find a balance there, because both of them are important, but I see that a lot of people don't think about it. And Gary sees that too. You have to balance those out and then know that, hey, you're growing to a certain size, but I'm also evangelizing. So you got to start sending people out, or start growing other ministries. Start thinking of other things that can help grow somewhere else, because you can't put them all in those 4 walls. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later on in a whole nother section on how to grow outwardly, because other teaching facilities are growing in those areas. And I think that in our organization or in our churches, we're not doing that because we're not taking advantage of technology that we have now. So we just talked about how to get from here to there in this session here. And I think the book, Going to the Next Level by Gary McIntosh, I think that he did a great job here. And I think this is a book that you should read, possibly read, in order to find out where it is you want to go. So remember, I'm Bennie Crawford. And know that if you are planning on reading it, let me review it before you do it. Let's do greater things.